Hi, everyone. I'm excited that I get to interview author, songwriter, and storyteller Dominic Lim today. I'm Nikki Giamarco. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a library associate at Ekstrom Columbus Branch Library in Pima County Public Library System, and I've worked here since July 2022. I'm a member of the Biblio Lotus team, which was started in 2021. Biblio Lotus team's vision is a blooming Asian community represented in the culture and operations of the library system. The mission is to support and value the culture and voice of our Asian communities in Pima County by providing resources and programs and by establishing ongoing partnerships with Asian organizations therein. And so Dominic Lim's debut novel, All the Right Notes, has been named a 2023 Best Book by USA Today, Harper's Bazaar, Goodreads, Book Riot, Library Journal, Booklist, and Entertainment Weekly, who call it a swoony, joyful rom-com to take readers into a love story worthy of a Broadway stage. He's a member of the Writers Grotto and is a co-host of the long-running Babylon Salon reading and performance series in San Francisco. Dominic holds a Master of Music from Indiana University Jacobs School of Music and is an alum of Oberlin College and Conservatory of Music and has sung with numerous professional early music and choral ensembles, a talented singer. He's a proud member of the Actors Equity Association and has performed off-Broadway and in regional productions through the U.S. He works, I believe that's still correct, as a paralegal for a biotech company in the Bay Area and lives in Oakland with his loving and supportive husband, Peter, and their whiny but probably cute cat, Phoebe. So here's just a sampling of All the Right Notes accolades and reviews. So Entertainment Weekly listed it as the 6 best romance novels of summer 2023. USA Today listed it as the 10 best romance novels coming out in the summer 2023. Booklist Editor's Choice Adult Books in 2023, as well as top 10 romance debuts of 2023. Library Journal listed it as the best romance of 2023. BookBub, the best books of summer 2023, and also the 18 must-read new releases by AAPI authors. And LGBTQ Reads, most anticipated LGBTQ plus romance of 2023. I'm also excited to say Dominic's going to be in Tucson, Arizona as a presenting author at the Tucson Festival of Books. So Saturday, March 9th, he'll be in the Everybody's Got a Secret panel at 10 and Sunday in the Small Town Romance panel at 1. And in the, I guess this is just kind of a catch-all, Ask Me Almost Anything Romance Author Edition at 4 p.m. So go to TucsonFestivalofBooks.org if you want to get your romance on for more details to show up, and definitely plan to go early because a lot of the seats fill up fast. Dominic also has an upcoming book, I'd love for you to talk about at the end, Karaoke Queen, which will be out, I believe, in September. Oh, wow, yeah. That's exciting. So, that is a lot of accolades. I don't know if you were surprised by all the love.
I was, for sure. Yeah, it's been such a joy, and I'm so lucky that my first book was so well received by the public and by reviewers, and I think it's hard for us as people of color, as Asian writers, particularly as a Filipino writer, to get our books even to be noticed by the public. So, and in particular for me as a debut author and someone who's writing queer romance, for it to get that amount of attention was very surprising, but just I'm so blessed that it had happened.
Awesome. And I want to state for the record that I used to be one of those people that would say I would read anything except romance or Westerns.
Right.
I always thought romance was kind of not for me, the old Fabio covers or the Danielle Steele or the Jackie Collins with like the very kind of toxic masculinity stereotypes and the helpless I guess, uh, the woman that can't do anything for
Right.
themselves is
The bodice
what,
rippers.
yeah,
Yeah.
like who are these people? So just recently I started incorporating more romance into my TBR list because there are more um, people of color and queer authors writing stories, and some stories that incidentally have queer love in them, like TJ Klune's books. They're just part of the story, but it's not like a romance novel even, but there's a romance in it, which is always cool.
Yeah.
And so I was curious to ask what drew you to the romance genre. Why start with this
Hmm.
genre?
Well, I think we have a lot in common actually, because I don't even think I actually read any romances until after I'd finished writing the book. So yeah, I didn't sit down at my desk and go, okay, now I'm going to write a romance. In fact, I didn't even know what tropes were until way after the book was like starting to be publicized and I had to start talking about it, and people would be giving me these questions like, "I'll be prepared to say what the tropes are," and I said, "I don't even know what that means." So I was very I just sat down to write the book that I wanted to I wished that my younger self had, 10, 15, 20 years ago. A book that, to my knowledge, did not exist at the time, and it just so happened to be a romance only because I wanted to write a story that was full of love and full of joy and not informed by intergenerational trauma or queer trauma or oppression. And I
It didn't
think
even have like racism tones in it,
no,
really. Yeah.
yeah, not really. Not that I could think of. And because that was important to me to put out a joyful book. And I think it does speak to the genre romance as a genre, that's how it went. And so I think that is one of the beautiful things about romance, is that romance is defined by a happy ever after, right? And we need those stories, especially people who have historically been underrepresented in literature. um, One author, Kosoko Jackson, who also writes romance but other things too, like young adult, I listened to a podcast of his, and he said he wants to get to the point where Black authors don't have to write always about Black excellence. And I think that's such an excellent point, is that as Asian authors in particular, I think we live our lives sort of always having to be excellent, be the best, and certainly write about these kinds of experiences. And I want us to be able to get to a point where we can just write about us living our daily lives, not about having to overcome great obstacles, but just, running into the guy that we fell in love with in high school and trying to get together with him. Why can't we have those kinds of stories,
Right. I agree. And it's nice that no one's like he's not a violinist, he's a piano player. And um Emmett's not like the math whiz or sciency person.
Right.
He's the jock and he
Yeah.
plays sports. And he's like the hunk of the school. So it's really funny that it's like Asians can exist in the world and play all the parts.
Yes.
So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, what were the joys, but also like the pitfalls, since this was your debut novel,
Hmm.
and I sense some perfectionism in you. I feel like everything that was written down was intentional, but I don't know if that was intentional on your part, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. Yeah, it's funny because e- editing this book with my editor, she's a wonderful editor. She's at Grand Central Publishing. Her name is Alex Logan. And I think she, like you, sort of assumed that everything I wrote was very intentional. So when we edited, her edits to me were very light, because she did get the sense that it took me a long time to get to the point where I was basically like each period was exactly where I wanted it to be, you know. And it's true, because this was my first book, and it took me 3 years to write, and I workshopped it. I gave it time to bloom in my head, and I am that kind of perfectionist writer. Like I keep editing and editing. But I love that. I actually love doing that. The second book was different though.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to know actually if you, so what did you learn and do differently?
Yeah. I did differently, not because I learned, but because I had to. The second book, they wanted it to come a year after the first book. Yeah,
Gotcha.
so yeah, actually the first draft was due the day that All the Right Notes published. Yeah, which was extremely difficult, and I actually did not meet the deadline. I had to ask for an extension because I mean, as you would one would imagine, those 2 months leading up to the book launch are very busy, doing things like this, interviews and writing interviews and all sorts of things. And I was so busy, and I have a full-time job. And on top of that,
Yes, I do.
yeah, I had to put out this second book, and so it was hard. Last year was very difficult. And so I had to really depend on my editor for the second book. I didn't have that time because I was basically getting up early, checking my emails, going to work I work remotely. And then as soon as I log off from work, write for, 2 to 4 hours at night. And what happens is, and then you go to bed, and what happens is you don't have those spaces in between to allow things to percolate and for the connections to be made. I think so much of writing happens when you're not writing, you
Makes
know.
sense.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you have to switch
Hmm.
yourself on and off.
You do.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's difficult because the first book, I know that so many of the ideas, the connections were made going on walks and like on the weekends when I was not writing, or when I was on vacation or in the shower. And here for the second book, I didn't have that luxury, so I really had to depend on my editor to help me make a lot of the connections.
is it like songwriting? Like you write that one and you get that creative space and then it pops and suddenly they're like more, 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 faster, faster.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's kind of like that, and I would imagine it's kind of like writing for anything where there's a constant deadline, like journalism or writing for TV, for example. And I was not accustomed to that, and I'm not used to it because, as most non published writers, we have this sense that we can just take as long, and then we should take as long as we need to put our first book out. And then, but what people don't realize is if that book goes well, people want the next book, so you should always be working on the second book, or third or fourth or whatever, because it's a
Interesting.
career, it's not just one.
Yeah, for you now,
Hopefully.
definitely.
Yeah, right.
That is so cool. You're living the dream. Almost, yeah. What were your influences? Like, did you look to other writers or were you studying writer styles or did you want to sort of be in the fashion of a specific kind of writer?
I don't think I ever intentionally patterned myself after any particular writers. I was for sure I'm a big reader, a voracious reader ever since I was a little kid. My mom, she taught me how to, because when we moved here from the United States, I was just a baby, and my mother had been an English teacher in the Philippines, and when she brought us over, no one would we landed in Virginia, and no one would hire her to teach English, because she's an immigrant and she's Filipina, and it's the 80s, and who would in Virginia, who's going to hire her to teach English to their kids? So what she did was she taught me. She taught me how to read before I even got into kindergarten. So she taught me how to read, yeah, and I read so much. So a lot of what I read was fantasy, and I did read a lot of Greek mythology because I was subconsciously looking for the other, the fantastic, because from a very early age, I knew that I was queer. I mean, of course, I knew I was a Filipino living in primarily white Virginia, um, but I also knew from a very young age that I was gay. So I drifted towards sci-fi and fantasy because I was looking for the other, people who lived outside of the margins of normality. And that's what I drifted towards. And as I kept reading, they say as I was taking writing classes, who is your writing family? Who are the authors that you really, whose writing really speaks to you and whose writing really most resembles yours or most resembles what you would like to be able to do? And I think those writers for me include Michael Cunningham, Michael Chabon, Jhumpa Lahiri, um, Zadie Smith, just beautiful, beautiful lyrical literature, whose sentences to me sound like music in my head. Those are the kinds of writers that I was gravitated towards. And I had always intended for my first book to be, a literary novel of some sort. It just didn't it just didn't happen that way.
Really funny. I mean, there's the humor is great. David Sedaris is one of my favorite
Oh yeah.
writers too. So I
God.
almost feel like some of that snarky humor injected itself into your subconscious or something.
Oh yeah. Thanks.
um, but I do love Keto as a character because I grew up in, not that that's ever gone away because I still am a very anxious type of person and awkward, and so his character seems so real to me, and I loved the sharing of his thoughts and how very out there he was with his anxieties. His sweatiness was so funny and so real. That's just such a thing that happens. And his people pleasing, his need to constantly reevaluate. Um, did you base any part of that on you, or is he an amalgamation of different people or different characters?
I would say of all the aspects of keto that most resemble me, it is probably the personality quirks. People assume because he's a musician and I'm a musician that's the biggest commonality. But I'm not actually a pianist. I can play piano, but I'm not a very good pianist, and I'm not really a composer either. So I'm foremost a singer. So I actually musically I have more in common with Emmett, strangely. So yeah, but Keto's personality is most like mine. Yeah, I think that, yeah.
He's a very lovable character. Um,
Okay.
and your so the family dynamics were also interesting, Mr. Cruz, of course, and that um, relationship was so important in the book as well.
Yeah.
Was this also based on your real life relationship with your father, if you're comfortable talking about it? And or was it also just kind of an amalgamation of different experiences from people you've known?
Hmm. Um, yeah. uh, my younger sister, well, let me see. There's four siblings in our family. I'm the oldest of three brothers, and I'm three boys and one girl. And out of the four of us, three of us are queer. This is a very interesting family. And my younger sister read the book and she texted me, and she's basically crying, and she said, the dad really got to me because that dad was the dad that we all kind of wished that we had. So it was not based our the Mr. Cruz was not really based on our father, but really more of who I think I definitely wished I could have had as a father. father figure, and those qualities were present more in sort of a lot of the mentors and teachers that I had growing up over the years, both as English teachers and as music teachers. Yeah.
Amazing. I would have loved him as a father as well.
Yeah.
He's so mindful of how things affect keto and effect is sort of helping to direct his happiness, I guess, too. But
Yeah.
I really felt though the lens of you know queer characters in terms of the romance, it's a universal story.
Mhm.
Like it could be so many people's stories, feeling like, oh, I'm not good enough for this person, they'll never love me, um, misjudging the way other people perceive us. This story really kind of transcends, and I think earlier when we were talking, just existing out in the world, having stories that aren't tied to trauma or racism, but that um, we can experience joyful love too.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's one of the really, um, really great and successful things that the story achieves. And again, I don't know if you were doing that intentionally and kind of considering that throughout, or that was a happy accident.
Yeah, no, it was very intentional for me to populate the book with queer and people of queer characters and people of color. Usually they're both, and to have them all have happy, like fulfilled for the most part lives, and for the conflict not to come from their identity issues, but from just normal day-to-day things. So yeah, that was very intentional. Um, yeah, because as I mentioned, I wanted that joy to be out in the world, and I knew that for this book, the people who would be reading this book, that the chances were fairly high that these characters would be some of the first instances of those kinds of people that they experienced. And meeting readers afterwards, going, I'd never seen a non-binary character or even been confronted with people using they, them, or whatever, um, and I didn't know that much about Filipino culture until I read this book. A lot of Filipino books in the past have been geared toward, and this is not a mistake, and this is I think how it should be, geared towards the Filipino gaze, and I think that is important, and we need those books. And this book is not necessarily written towards just the Filipino gaze. It is written for my Filipino readers and my Filipino queer readers and queer readers, but also written knowing that other people would be reading it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And though the book has some dark themes like grief and loss, and I know people can access trigger warnings if they need to before reading, but there's a lot of humor and a lot that kept the tone light. And I felt it was really a fun read overall.
Mhm.
Um, not, it's so hard to say beach read because beach read seems like such a kind of a cheesy term for books that you might just read and forget about right afterwards. And I don't feel like
Sure.
this is quite that.
Uh-huh.
Um, but that again, that joy really comes through. But really, just some funny bits. Sorry, I forgot
Oh
that
yeah.
we have
The motion,
the motion detector
right? Detector
lights, so
turns
our
the light
library
off.
can save money. So I probably should get up and move around so they think I'm here. Um, but there were a couple of moments. There was just this really funny, almost Three's Company scene where Emmett and Keto are in Mr. Cruz's house and in the closet. And I won't spoil a line, but I just thought that was so clever. It was just hilarious.
Thanks.
So how I know we talk a lot about intentionality and your strive to edit and re-edit. And so a lot of it did seem intentional, but laid out in a way that was that flowed really nicely. And so is this your natural sense of humor? I know you said your quirks are part of Keto's character, but is this
Yeah.
also your sense of humor?
Oh, this is definitely my sense of humor. This is just how my brain works. I think I can't remember if it was Kirkus or Library Journal, but someone called my humor snarky, and it is pretty snarky. I lived in New York. I was very much part of the queer, community in New York in the early 2000s, and there is this, culture or tradition of being able to clap back. And so a lot of that kind of humor found its way into Ujima. But a lot of the situational humor, like it being in the closet, as you said, that just comes from my own brain because that's just
You
how I
did
am.
really great double entendres throughout the
Right.
book. So,
Thanks.
um, and we talked about the piano. So Keto plays the piano as an accompanist for the choir.
Yeah.
And music is such a big part of the storyline
Hmm.
that it's sort of embedded in his life. And there's a line of the book I really love that sort of explains how music has helped Keto's character, where his thoughts are, my music felt safe where it was, inside, where no one could touch it, criticize it, or hate it for being less than perfect, where no one could call me names because of the meaning behind the words. Um, and that was so powerful. And I think that resonates with so many people. Um, did I know you said you were a singer. Was music a way to also kind of escape any kind of life's, challenges, or have a way to kind of protect yourself?
That's an interesting question. I've been a singer for as long as I can remember, and I think for me, it's not really a matter of protection. It's really a matter of, how people will explain what a musical is and why people start singing is because the emotions get so big that they can't speak them anymore. They have to sing them, and that's sort of, I think, why I became a singer, and that's why music was so important for me, is because, um, I mean, I wrote things, sure, I wrote in a journal, but I've always been the kind of person who feels things very deeply and in a big way. And for me, the best outlet for that was, for some people it's exercise, for some people it's sports or whatever. In mine, it was music, it was singing. It always felt the best for me to get the emotions out by singing, whether it was along with the radio or, in choir, even in church. That was my always my chosen method of explaining what was going on inside me.
Cool. Were you also yourself in an a cappella group at Oberlin?
At Oberlin, I've been in a cappella groups my whole life, but yes, I was in an Oberlin and I was in the Obertones for a semester. My first semester, or was it a year? I can't remember. I think it was only a semester. Uh, and a little trivia thing is that my first semester at Oberlin, when I was in the Obertones, I was in it with Ed Helms, who is an actor. Yeah. So we were in the
Wow,
Obertones together.
so funny.
Yeah, for
Okay,
a semester.
very talented group of folks. Yeah.
Right.
And you wrote and you incorporated the song lyrics for Keto, and
Yeah.
then you also sang a part I play, which is a really of that song really evokes a lot of emotion. It's very beautiful. So um, you wrote that song just for the book, is that correct?
Yeah,
Or
well,
had you had it kind of in your head before?
what happened was that the song itself only really arose through the writing of the story. It was just a part of the plot, part of the story, and the lyrics, just part of the lyrics that I knew it was going to keep coming through the book in various ways. So at a certain point, as I was writing the book, I made the decision to uh, manifest the song in reality, because my first thought was I needed it for myself to understand what this song was and how it would inform the characters and the plot. And then secondly, after that, I knew that it would be kind of cool to have it out in the public because it would help to, you know, the reader's experience. And to be honest, in particular, it would help to sell the book to a publisher, you know, say, hey, you know, there's this to the book. That makes it interesting. But anyway, as I was writing it, I approached my friend Martin McGinn, who's an incredible composer, and we worked together to he wrote the music. I kind of said it should sound like this, it should sound like that, and he wrote it like in a week. It was really fast. He said it came very fast. And then after that, and it was during the pandemic, so we did it completely apart. Him in his own apartment in Oakland, me in my house, and um, I I changed some of the lyrics to track better to his music. I suggested a couple of changes to the music, and then we recorded our things separately, him in his studio and mine in my closet in my house. And then he mixed it together. Yeah.
I've heard people doing that when they had to work from home to broadcast anything, just because
Yeah.
it had the least distraction and the
Right.
better sound.
Right.
Um, did you do the video yourself, or who did the video?
He did the video too. Yeah,
Oh,
Martin
wow.
did. Yeah, the lyric video.
Is
Um,
is that your profile or no?
no, I don't
No,
I
okay.
no, no, it's not. Yeah, it's all just yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a really cool concept. I'm surprised there haven't been more integrated concepts like that by now. And what's really funny too is your book had so much kind of realism in it with the SNL and the Wonderland concept, which was hilarious to me because it took me a minute to understand the play on words. I was like, Wonderland, one hit wonder. Okay, I get it now. Um, did that exist in the world? It's so fantastic of a concept.
Well, what happened was the first iteration of that music, I knew that there had to be scene where Ujima sort of took the stage for a while, and I wanted it to be an interactive musical because when you write comedy, so much of the comedy comes from the situation, and interactive theater is something that a lot of people do not like. uh, even
Nobody
though
wants to be pulled
no
into
one wants
the.
to be pulled into it. Yeah, exactly. Even though myself, my only off-Broadway show was an interactive musical, so it was sort of based on that. And the first iteration was actually it was a jukebox, and also the other part was it had to be a jukebox musical because a lot of people don't like jukebox musicals. So at first, it was a jukebox musical about Britney Spears, or with using Britney Spears music. And then as I was writing, I saw online that someone had already started developing a jukebox musical using Britney Spears' songs. So I said, okay, I'm going to need to change it, but I don't want this to happen to me again. So what can I do to make a jukebox musical out of stuff that people know, but people don't care enough about to write an entire musical about? So that's how I came up on, I started using one hit wonders, because that's exactly what one hit wonders are, songs that people like, but they don't really care about the rest of the,
I
so,
wonder if someone like would ever approach you and be like, "Hey, we really want to do this."
right.
This would be so much fun. So Ujima, aka G, is
Mhm.
such a contrast to Keto in terms of their confidence and outgoing personality. Ujima is someone I wish I could like channel inside of me. And they infuse Keto with such kind of support and sort of buoys Keto, I think, along the way sometimes.
Mhm.
And G has their own journey that gets a little highlight at the end.
Yeah.
Um, and talking about having some people read a non-binary character for the first time. And G's character is really also a very lovable character. It's so funny. What influence did you have in building Ujima's character?
Yeah, Ujima's character was based on a friend of mine in New York who I briefly dated, and his name is Dwayne Cooper. I've gotten his permission to now say who he is, but his name is Dwayne Cooper. He's an actor who lives in New York. He's currently in the revival of Sweeney Todd, and he used to be professional drag queen, and he is not non-binary, nor is he trans, but he used to be. He was on the fourth season of RuPaul's Drag Race, so yeah. So we dated well before that, and because we did a show together, and he's always been someone who's stayed with me because he is that kind of person who is just so one, both big and out there and extremely talented and very funny, but also there is this just warm, beautiful center to him. He's just one of the most kind, caring people I've ever met. So I wanted it's exactly how you said. That person is a contrast to Quito. So that's why I wanted that kind of character in the book, but I also wanted someone who was kind of larger than life to help guide Quito through some of his decisions that he makes.
And I feel like readers, even as a secondary character, it's almost like the supporting actor where people are like, we want to see more. Will there be more of G's story in other works?
Funny that you mentioned that. G does show up in my second book, Karaoke Queen, towards the end. And then my intention is, and I've already talked about this with my editor, my intention is that Ujima is half of the focus of the third book. So they are, yeah, the romantic half of that book. And then the other half is also another very minor character that appears in the second book. So
You are taking your own advice and starting projects sort of like ahead
yeah,
of time.
yeah. Although
Awesome.
the idea for G being the focus of the third book, I have to say it's not only because, but it is primarily because it is literally the only thing people say in terms of what I should be doing next. It's always, will you please write, their love story? So it's like,
That's
okay,
so awesome. Yeah.
yeah,
It's almost like a tease. We just get a little glimpse of their life, and now we want to know the rest of the story.
yeah.
Um, and there are so many other ways too that the book breaks racial and gender stereotypes. One of the sections of the book where it was like, oh, alto or soprano roles don't have to be solely for female
Oh,
singers. Um, and then I always think about names are something I'm always curious about. So
mm,
the name Emmett for sort of the hunky jock turned heartthrob action star. And I had to look up what the name means. And I don't know if did you choose this name for a
I did
reason?
choose the name, but I didn't choose it because of the meaning. I'm curious as to what you found.
So on babynames.com, it says that the meaning of the name Emmett is, and it's primarily a male name of English origin
Uh-huh.
that means entirety,
Oh, wow.
um, or entire. I'm sorry,
Entire, yeah,
entire, like the whole. I guess
yeah.
it's a common British surname,
Uh-huh.
and also a fairly common first name. It was increasingly popular with the publishing of Stephanie Meyer's Twilight book series.
Oh, I didn't know
Um,
that.
I didn't know that either, and I hadn't read. So I guess there was a character named Emmett Cullen, and then nicknames for the name Emmett include M and Met. Um, Famous people with the name Emmett include the infamous criminal Emmett Dalton, and Emmett Till, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, who was the
Right,
victim of a hate crime lynching.
right.
And then Emmett Kelly was a famous American clown during the Great Depression.
Oh,
Um, oh, fictional characters include Dr. Emmett Doc Brown from Back to the Future and Emmett Honeycutt from Queer as Folk.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
so that's so funny. So again, I just, it's like, every time I read the name, it like just stuck out to me, and I'm thinking in my head, um, mixed Japanese American person. But I'm like, the two don't kind of go together in my brain mentally. So I'm like, how did you come up with that?
Well, I knew that first of all, he was going to be Japanese or mixed race. So I the Aoki came from a friend of mine, but Emmett is because it is the name of the kid I had a crush on in grade school. And his name was Emmett Hammersley, which is like I've always thought is like the best name ever, Emmett Hammersley. Um, but I couldn't use that name, so yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I love that though. And we're talking before about not having the broad Asian representation or even queer representation in books or media,
Mhm.
um, that didn't have like the Asian stereotype, like um, karate person or the I don't know why, Chinese mafia or whatever,
Yeah.
and or the footbound Asian woman. So it's so refreshing to me to see more Asians writing and directing and producing their own or any stories,
Mhm.
starring in Marvel movies
Yeah.
and having like Girls Trip and Joel Kim Booster, whom I like to follow because he's a Korean adoptee,
Mhm.
who wrote and produced Fire Island and his hilarious um, Bowen
Yeah.
Yang and on SNL and Kristen Kish on Top Chef. Even there's
Yeah.
just so much more. Um, it's starting to feel more normalized, I think.
Yeah.
But with COVID, at the same time, there were so many Asian hate crimes, and then the book bans started
Mhm.
happening, and LGBTQ plus and BIPOC books are um, in danger of being removed in certain communities on library shelves. So, and every great now and then, I still notice an author who's white or straight writing BIPOC or queer characters in their books.
Mhm.
So, what are your thoughts about the future of diverse representation, um, alongside the simultaneous pushback from conservative communities?
Yeah. That's a big question. I do want to say first that I personally I hmm, I personally don't have a problem with people. Okay, let me just say it this way. I don't have a problem with white authors writing characters who are non-white, and in particular, I don't have a greater problem with anyone writing characters who are not of the same, identity as them, because, we are writers and we need to be able to imagine what it's like to be someone who is not ourselves. But at the same time, it is extremely important for the publishing industry and for readers and for people who buy books and get books from the library to support writers who do write who do write own voice. I know we don't really use own voices as much anymore, but that I still like the idea of own voices of authors who are writing characters who are their own, you know, identity. And we need to support. There was a little bit of a hubbub last year, and I think it happens every year when Goodreads released their list of top romance books. And these are books chosen by readers, it's not a jury or anything. And I think out of this very long list of the nominees, I think there was maybe one author of color. And that is such a big disappointment. I think, and I would like to say that my own publisher, Forever, is just a fantastic, supportive imprint of Hachette in that they support diverse authors, and that Hachette does as well. And I see other publishers doing that. That needs to continue, but in particular, readers really need to support our stories. I think that is key. Mm, right, because diversity, if the readers don't, then the publishers will see that there is no interest. And so their slow their slow improvement of what they're doing will backtrack, as we've been seeing with rights. So
It's on us in libraries too to promote and highlight. And I prefer, I guess, authentic voices. I
me
feel
too.
sometimes I can tell if something doesn't feel like it's coming from a genuine place, or if they didn't have enough input
Yeah,
from the community.
right.
But I love it so much when I feel like someone's story resonates with mine.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't want to go over a time. I know you've talked about food in other interviews, and I'll just mention that the listing of meals and food is also again intentional in this book, and it's done in a very really wonderful and fun sometimes way. But because I know it's been discussed as a love language in other interviews, I want
Yeah.
to do the upcoming book and find out a little bit more about Karaoke Queen.
Yeah. Well, food does appear in Karaoke Queen as well. Not as much. Well, does it? I guess it does. Uh, I guess in different, probably in different, just in different ways. Um, but yeah, and I have mentioned in other interviews that the the intentionality of the food was basically because of my editor, because she was the one who really wanted that in there, and I'm so thankful that she pushed me in that direction. It is very easy for me to write about food because I love food. I'm a huge foodie. It's just that in my head, All the Right Notes was about music, so it's like, oh, it's only going to be about music, but a book can be about many different things.
Well, and then it creates more subtext, I think, to some of the characters' relationships too, which is
Yeah.
just so are you able to tell us much about
Oh,
Karaoke Queen, or is it
sure.
still okay?
Yes, I am. Okay, so it's funny because I know I keep talking about All the Right Notes. I promise I will get to Karaoke Queen. But All the Right Notes, I have been in the past for a long time saying that All the Right Notes is a romantic comedy. And very recently I have stopped describing it as a romantic comedy because as you and I were talking before we started the interview, it's not super funny at the end. It's there is some there's some, without mentioning it, there's some loss there. And I think that people were a little upset that it was being promoted as this hilarious, belly roll, romantic comedy, when in fact it's not really. But Karaoke Queen is very much a romantic comedy. Um, in the very definition of a romantic comedy, in which the situations arise out of shenanigans that would never happen in real life, that like someone would, fall in love with a prostitute or make them into a princess or whatever. It's just these things in Karaoke Queen would never happen. So basically, the main character, whose name is Rex, runs into his ex-boyfriend at a bar. He's now running a bar, his ex-boyfriend, which is a failing bar, and he decides to, as a second chance romance, try to woo his ex-boyfriend back by refurbishing the bar, and by in doing that, like making a karaoke night um, that will help drum up business. And the host of the karaoke night would be this drag queen named Regina Mundi. And what he doesn't tell his ex-boyfriend, for reasons that you'll find out, is that he's the drag queen. So it's this kind of like Tootsie kind of thing where he has to be in two places at once and never let on that he's the drag queen. Uh, and uh,
Did you write any music for this one too, like
no,
original songs that they'll sing? Oh,
no,
oh,
no.
okay.
Yeah, because karaoke is not original music. So,
In the
right.
fictional world, it could
In
be.
the fictional world, it could be,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's
Uh, y-
awesome.
yeah, and it's an exploration really of drag, and I think it is the first romance that centers a drag queen, really, because drag queens have popped up in other books, but they're always as in my first book, a supporting character or the comedy character. And I wanted to sort of comment on what's going on right now with the public perception of drag and drag queens, and how people are making them out to be number one villain. And it is this parallel journey with the main character, because he had quit for reasons of that you'll find out, and it's his sort of how he learns how to embrace that part of himself again, and to say that this is valid, this is okay, it's okay for me to be like this, to embrace my femininity, and just to be a performer like this, that I'm safe, that I'm loved.
When I go back to Nashville to see family, I'm going to flaunt that book. For all those Tennesseans that, for
Oh
whatever reason,
gosh,
have a problem
I
with
know.
it. Are there any other projects upcoming, or really that's
Yeah.
the only one you can talk about?
Yeah, that's coming up, and then as we mentioned before, that the third book will most probably center Ujima. Um, I do have an idea for a trilogy after that. But yeah, that's just starting to percolate in my head. Um, so yeah.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask, as a library staff, what are you reading now?
What am I reading now?
Or do you have
Um,
time to read? Maybe you don't have
well,
time to
that's the
read.
thing, is I finally have time to read. As I mentioned, I was so busy for months, and then finally, basically at the beginning of the year, now have time. So I'm reading at the moment The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley, which is just fantastic. Yeah. I had the great pleasure of meeting him at Bookmarks Book Festival in North Carolina, and I
And he'll
dragged
be
him
at
to
the
karaoke.
Festival of Books too.
And he will, yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yes, yeah. I dragged Stephen out to karaoke, and he was game. So we, so with a bunch of other authors. But anyway, I'm finally getting around to reading his book, and it's absolutely fantastic. And I'm also reading, because I'm trying to do as much research as I can before I plunge into Ujima's story. I'm reading Janet Mock's first autobiography, Redefining Realness. So that's on my bedside table, as well as a friend of this is funny, when you debut, you sort of have a cohort of other authors who debut at the same time. And my lovely friend and dear cohort, Julie Soto, who's also an author at Forever, her book Forget Me Not is also on my bedside table. I'm just about to start that as well, and I'm really excited. It's funny, we see each other all the time, and we're so supportive of each other, and we had we had never read each other's books, but
Understand.
yeah, but we all understand. We just don't have the time to read every single person's other's books, but I'm finally having the chance to do so.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Dominic, thank you so much for sharing information about all the right notes and the writing process, and other information that we learned so much more about you and your next project. So I really appreciate it and feel honored that we have this chance to talk. And we will see you at Ekstrom Columbus Library on Friday, March the 8th at 3 o'clock for your author talk. And we are all looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to it too.